Bonjour everyone, Pantoufleee here today for a new video in which we have the pleasure of talking about the Object 260, which is an upcoming tier 10 collectible Russian heavy tank. And overall, I'm disappointed. It's only my point of view, but at least it seems like Wargaming decided not to go for two broken tanks, at least for the first part of the test. Let me explain to you briefly how it works before we talk further and deeply about the Object 260. What you gotta understand about testing in general is that when those kind of new tanks are coming into test, there are two tests that are being made. The first one is for Super Tester. It's a closed server for only developers, etc., so they can try the tank out before releasing it to the major public or before releasing it to the regular testers, and therefore those testers that you will see in current battles. And after, you have the public test. The public test, which is basically Wargaming giving out to the 15 best clans, 10 players out of each clans of the top 15, those tanks to test them and gather some data about the tank, how it performs, to know if they have to nerf or buff it. And of course, when Wargaming does that, they are going to release the tank multiple times in order for them to balance it or to make it the way they intended to make it look like. And at the moment, we are at the first ever testing of the Object 260, which means this tank is subject to change in the future, and not necessarily by the time of its release, but also in the future testing, because trust me, the test is not over yet for this tank, it only started. So now, why am I saying that? And why am I disappointed about the tank? Let me explain to you briefly what's the problem with this tank. The main problem is the armor profile, which in my opinion doesn't really make sense. Let me explain. When you take a look at the armor profile, and here that's a T-22 medium with a PCR shooting at the tank, you can already see what is the problem. Main problem being, of course, the lower part, but that's totally logic. It's a weak spot. Now, I have two problems with this tank. When I first heard about the 260, I was expecting it to be like an Object 252U, but at tier 10, which makes it, of course, one of the strongest tanks, probably one of the most overpowered. And maybe it's for the best that Wargaming decided not to make it too broken. But when you take a look at the upper part of the hull armor, I don't understand what Wargaming did. It's worse than an IS-7. I mean, you can literally penetrate it even without the tank being angled to fight you. This is kind of weird, but most importantly, I could actually work with the tank that has this kind of armor there. Now, the main problem I have with this tank, when you take a look at it, it's probably the turret. Here, that's totally logic that it's easy to penetrate because the tank is not angled at all. But look at this, guys. And let me explain to you what is the problem. Here, that's an IS-4 shooting at the tank. When you take a look at the hull, as you can see, everything is penetrable. And even when the tank is over-angling the top, you can still penetrate that area using an IS-4 with regular shells. I mean, you're supposed to be a heavy tank, aren't you? And here it doesn't feel like a heavy tank, especially when it comes to the turret. Just look at those easy angles to penetrate with your gun. Like, how are you supposed to fight back with a tank that has this kind of weird arranged armor? And I forgot to talk about one last thing, by the way. I forgot to talk about this. This is a problem to me. This weak spot, those weak spots are a big problem, because here the T-22 medium is not using any gold shells. So it means when you are using gold shells, you can actually penetrate the turret just like that in the snap of a finger. I don't know if it's the case. All I know is that the armor profile of this tank scares me. But of course, it doesn't have only downsides, trust me, because for the rest, this tank is pretty much a dream one to ride. Briefly, guys, I would like to talk with you about two things concerning that tank, which is basically outperforming any single heavily armored tank at tier 10 when it comes to both the mobility and the gun. First thing first, I want to talk about the gun. This thing has an insane DPM, 3k DPM without using adrenaline. So if you use adrenaline, you can probably climb up to something like 3.3 or even 3.4k DPM, which makes it the best tank in terms of DPM in this goddamn game when it comes to Russian heavies. Now, one thing that is funny and out of context a little bit, the name of the tank is Object 260 and it has 260 millimeters of penetration. I'm just leaving that here because I found it funny. I know I have a sad life. No, what do you need to understand with this tank is that it has 9.5 seconds of reload for 420 alpha damage. So it's definitely a reliable tank when it comes to dealing damage. So you can probably hold flanks if you are not alone with it. Now for the rest, of course, we have the traditional 6 degrees of gun depression that all the Russian heavies have in common, which is definitely not the best, but not the worst either. Let's say that it's average, but it will not allow you to be as versatile as, for example, the American tanks and all those kind of tanks. That's the thing. But now, and another thing that is really important to understand when you're playing with the Object 260 is the mobility. It's a shame that I can't show you the replays of the 260, but it basically has the same mobility as a medium tank. So in fact, if my calculations are correct and judging by the look of it and how Wargaming intended to add it, in World of Tank PC, this tank already exists, and in terms of armor and gun, it's a literal beast. And in Blitz, it seems like Wargaming decided to drop down a little bit that armor for us to experience a heavy tank that has to play with the mediums. I don't think that this tank is reliable when you're gonna face heavies. I think this tank will be the best when it comes to fighting mediums or light tanks. Is it a good thing? I think that it's a little bit weird that Wargaming decided to do that, but I'm not against it. I would rather have a tank that has a special gameplay and that is not necessarily fitting everyone's playstyle, rather than an OP broken tier 10 version of an Object 252U, which would break the matchmaking even more, aka Super Conqueror, Chieftain, etc., etc. No, at least that's some good news that Wargaming is proposing us. Now, my only regret about this tank is probably how this area here is armored. I wish Wargaming could actually really armor the turret and just leave the weak spot here, which is not a problem because, as you can see, penetrating it is quite easy. But at least Wargaming, please give us a strong turret. It's important, especially for heavy tank, because if you don't, this tank is gonna be extremely lame. Of course, we are still, guys, we are still in the first stages of the test, so this tank might come out completely broken. We don't have a clue right now, but I think, judging by Wargaming moves, putting this Object 260 without armoring it the same way as the one that is available in World of Tank PC, I have a good feeling about the tank. I have a good feeling about the tank not being completely broken, which is gonna make, free-to-play players or people that don't want any tier 10 OP collectible tank in the game quite happy. Now, to finish what I was saying concerning the mobility, you have one of the best as well, especially considering that you are a really fat tank and heavily armored, at least on paper, because as you can see, you will go around 50 kilometers per hour. So you are as fast as an AMX 50B or I think that's the only one that can go as fast as this. Maybe the WZ-113 as well. Gun dispersion is fine, which is weird for a Russian tank, but overall, if we had to sum up the tank, you will have a bad armor, an amazing gun, and an amazing mobility. Is it enough to make it a good tank? I think that it is. We'll have to wait for it to be released to the grand public to see what it will look like and how it will perform. Waiting for that, I would like to have your feedbacks on the tank, and I'll try to do a stream talking a little bit about my feelings and how I think the Object 260 is going to turn out, because of course I don't want to do it in video because it's going to be too long. But don't worry, as soon as the tank drops out, I will of course buy it, do a review, and hopefully like it. Tell me what you think about this tank in the comments, and I'm going to see you soon for a new video. Au revoir.